What's good, people? So we're going to do a quick video on how to approach a 15-mark question in your GCSE Religious Studies paper according to EDUCAS. Now, this applies generally to all of the 15 markers, whether it's paper 1, 2, or 3, and regardless of the routes. The 15-mark strategy is exactly the same, okay? Some will have extra marks for SPAG, but that's a different situation altogether. We're also going to be looking at it through the lens of how to apply the structure for both the essay and your paragraphs to make sure that you're maximizing the amount of marks that you get from these particular kinds of questions. So we'll start off with the mark scheme, and what you'll be able to see is that quite consistently it will talk about analysis, evaluation, different viewpoints, using different specialist language, terms and sources of wisdom, etc. The reason I highlight this is because when we talk about the different parts of the essay, as well as the different parts of your paragraph, so as I will refer to it as what, how, why 1, why 2, or others might use peel or something else, each parts of those reflects a different part of the mark scheme. So for example, in the how section of your paragraph, you might refer to scriptures, sources of wisdom and authority, specific practices where you'll need to use specialist language. So for example, using terms such as baptism, Eucharist, communion. And so that's where you match the criteria to get certain types of marks. Okay. If it's highly detailed analysis and evaluation, then once again, the analysis will be Y1 or the explanation if you're using peel, and the evaluation would typically be either the link, because you're linking how the argument presents itself back to the original question. But in terms of the evaluation, it's simply put, you're answering about how strong or weak that particular argument is, and you are basing it on accurate knowledge, teachings, and moral reasoning. Okay, easy as. Once again, we come to the conclusion part of your essay, and you can see that it says there, clear and well-supported judgments are formulated and backed up with evidence. Okay, so there's the mark scheme. I will typically be making sure that you're aiming for 3 to 4 in terms of the banding. Quite easy, especially if you do make sure that you have the bare minimum in terms of 2 paragraphs plus a conclusion, and that is the bare minimum. But we're going to talk about what we should be looking for now. So when you get your 15-mark question, the first thing that you want to do is bold your question. Okay, for this particular question, I have boxed what it's asking us to do in terms of discussing the statement and considering more than one point of view. And I've underlined the key terminology in terms of what we're going to be making sure the answer is referring to. So we're talking about here, evil, making it difficult for Christians to believe in an all-powerful God. The easy thing there already is when we're talking about omnipotent, all-powerful God, is to use the keyword omnipotent. Boom. There we go. Quite, the examiner knows that we're able to use key terms. And so what you want to do is bulb the question first and foremost. Box, underline, and make sure that every paragraph, especially as you reach the evaluation, the Y2 part of your paragraph, you are looking back at the question to make sure that you have made it relevant to the question. Okay. If you are struggling for time, and do bear in mind, I always say start off with the 15 markers first. If you're struggling for time, 2 paragraphs minimum plus a conclusion. Okay, in terms of the structure, here's what you want to do. Give the view for the what, give the source of wisdom and authority, or describe the practice for the how, explain the influence and the meaning for Y1. That's where you're analyzing the question. Y2 is where you give your evaluation. Remember, we're talking about the mark scheme there. So you want to make sure that you are really explaining why an argument that you have presented from a particular belief standpoint is strong or weak in reference to the question. You need no more than 3 paragraphs and no less than 2. And then you give your conclusion, which you'll give your final judgment in using the ABCD structure. What is the argument? Because what is the counter argument? And then give your final decision. Easy as. Now, caps to make sure that you beat. First one, please evaluate. This is consistently one of the easiest marks I see students throw away all the time. All you have to do is at the end of each paragraph, explain why it's a strong or weak argument in relative detail. Okay, it doesn't have to go into too much, but just decent enough detail that links what you've written back to the answer. Next, make sure you are giving both sides of the argument, please. Okay, remember, you get capped at band 2 if you don't give both sides of the argument. Doesn't matter how good the rest of the paragraphs are. And then lastly, no I until the conclusion. Remember, nobody cares what you think until the conclusion. That's where you give your final judgments. Okay. Lastly, in terms of how you're going to strategize your essay, here's what you want to do. You've got 2 options, depending on how confident you are with the different ranges of beliefs. First option is many, some, others, and I. All right, you can play around with it a bit as you're writing the exam question, but that's what you want to go for in terms of essay plan A. Essay plan B is firstly, secondly, thirdly, and then I. Simple, okay? You can typically get at least 3 to 4 different arguments, okay? And remember, you need them from across two sides of the argument. I've given some here in reference to the question about an all-powerful God, and there's at least 7 I've been able to pick out. I just needed to pick 3. So pick any 3, and then you go on from there. So as you're annotating your question, just write 3 arguments that come to you. Make sure you give 2 arguments from one side of the statement and 1 argument from the other side of the statement. And please, just as a reminder, when you're using the connectives for the first 2 paragraphs, make sure the second paragraph is relatively opposite to the first paragraph. And you could do that simply by saying, on the other hand. However, just simple connectives to make sure that the examiner knows that you are giving a different viewpoint to the one that you presented in your first paragraph. So on that point, key things to remember: bulb your question. You need a maximum of 3 paragraphs and a minimum of 2 paragraphs plus your conclusion. There are 2 plans for your essay. You've got many, some others in an I, or firstly, secondly, thirdly, and then I. Easy as. And then making sure that you are using the what, how, why 1, why 2 paragraph structure for each of your paragraphs, making sure that you evaluate each one by simply answering this question: how is it a strong or weak argument? On that point, good luck and God bless.